Although our blockade narrowly endured the first Macedonian counterattack, the second strike was too risky to stop. We were already spending all our gold on replenishing the central fleet at Karalis, meaning losing this one too would be terrible. We retreated back to Athens so we could reinforce our fleet allowing the Macedonians to trade once again. This also meant Glaucus was all alone in Thrace, where a major local slave uprising occurred during the tiring winter, making his decision to either march north and save our Dacian allies or staying within the fortification to fight the Macedonians more difficult. It didn't help that Antigonus marched through our lands, threatening both outcomes as well as Odessa's, possibly making the walls of Philippopolis useless. The slave resource was crucial for our economy, meaning it had to be protected at all cost. But this wasn't our only war front. As a matter of fact, we had already initiated our first stages of our invasion of Gaul from the Britannic colonies, given the orders for Isocrates and his extremely experienced forces to march for Diospolis, saving it from Massalian raiding parties, and also struggled with additional Roman-funded rebellions at Sardinia, who used their large numbers to make ladders and assault Karalis, the all-important port that cut the lines between Italy and Africa. So the fact that the rebels stormed the walls and flooded into the streets itself was a huge threat. We quickly deployed our militia units hoping to slow down the rebels, while the marines landed. The most brutal part of the battle was at the outskirts of the city, where we trapped most of the enemies in this open space. We used our limited cavalry to flank along the edge of the city, but they quickly got overrun, allowing the rebels to grind through our militia units. Once our marines reached the struggle, it was too late. The battle was over, and the port was sacked along with the fleet set on fire. To our surprise, they didn't occupy the port, but merely continued to raid the rest of the island. This was obviously a major loss, intensifying the threat on Greece. We had to rebuild our fleet at New Athens, but more urgently make sure the Romans didn't divert any units from Africa over to the other frontiers. Hence Zenobius, the man tying our alliance with the Dacians together, advanced from his otherwise defensive position in Mauritania towards the city of Carthage. By doing this, we also formalized our alliance with Carthaginians for a minor fee. This inspired the morale of our African forces, allowing them to seize Iole by razing the shit out of it. A couple of constructions was ordered to be made in an effort to avoid slums to develop. Nevertheless, we suffered quite a lot of casualties from performing this attack, forcing us to halt our offensive. Taking settlements wasn't important anyways. Drawing the attention of Rome was all that mattered. In the meantime, let's focus on the northern offensive, where the assault on this Gallic port began. Despite the settlement being occupied by Britannic tribes who sailed across the channel to get there, they only had 2 ships left to slow down our own trireme. They didn't stand a chance with us boarding their ships from the front to then ram the hostiles from the side. With the ships gone, we began the bombardment of the garrison, set their buildings on fire, and overall performed some pressing fire while our marines landed just outside the town. The Iceni quickly reacted, but was so disorganized in their defensive measures it just made for easy targets. Our marines pinned down the garrison in this choke, forming this even larger cluster of men. Overall, it was a bloodbath where we heroically captured the port, establishing a beachhead in Gallia from the north. We immediately began converting the town into a supply depot, in preparation for the upcoming arrival of the Britannic forces, who by accident weren't in position to depart just yet, mainly due to the looming threat of the northern Britannic tribes. At the same time, the situation back home had developed for the worse. Not only had more Macedonian forces returned to Thrace, but also a lesser force had covertly subdued the western coastline again, including Apollonia defeating one of our allies. This caused a massive outrage in Athens, with 2 political parties, including Cleisthenes, threatening to break away from our rule. And just for your interest, both parties held land in Iberia. So as Isocrates had marched towards Gaul, we had no armies to appease the situation. We had to deal with this through intrigue and a lot of gold, which we had plenty of due to Glaucus sacking Stoboi. However, all this did was isolate our army. Antigonus nearly caught Glaucus and his Greek forces, but they just about managed to escape. It wasn't all bad though. You see, the rebellion at Sardinia underestimated their own strength on multiple occasions, merely sacking the port of Karalis whenever they attacked. So when our Carthaginian allies somehow landed at the shores, we actually pacified the island, keeping it under Athenian control. Furthermore, the Egyptians had liberated one of the Libyan tribes in northern Africa. This new nation was so desperate for trade they accepted becoming a client state. Additionally, our scheme to lure the Roman forces away from Greece worked, meaning we just left Iole in rubbles, retreating back to the more defendable Mauritanian colony. This development made me confident we could defend the south, persuading me to go on the offensive in Gaul, with Socrates merging his Iberian levies with the Gallic levies, forming a sweet blend of both cultures, making both armies extremely flexible in combat. This also meant neither army had any decisive strength, but this fact was overlooked, as we wanted to advance on the Thessalians. Socrates marched straight for the former Ivernic capital only to find a Greek army stationed there. He opted to march for Lemonium instead and possibly link up with the Athenian armies invading from Britannia. The other army led by Gallienus attacked Tolosa just east of the Bosporus, where the Greeks sallied out to face our varied army in the field. We kept our Greek militia in the center to keep a firm front line supported by the Gallic swordsmen and Scutari spearmen. On the flanks we had our Iberian swordsmen and skirmishers to rush around the flanks and thus overwhelm the Thessalians on all fronts. It was clear we would win the battle, but the lack of a proper strength showed itself with us suffering quite a lot of casualties, again in this dragged out contest. However, we just refilled our army with local mercenaries. Up in the north, a few of our Britannic forces finally made it across the channel. They silenced a minor rebellion and began recruiting cavalry units to help our invasion plans that were going quite well. Until the Thessalians reacted to our offensive. Down in Tolosa, the Thessalians immediately counterattacked with two complete armies. As they were attacking from two directions, we planned to smash one army at a time, just like we had done back in Iberia so long ago. However, not only did it take forever for us to break this first army, but also we didn't have any units capable of holding back the second army, meaning they just overwhelmed the town garrison on that side. We tried to take it back, but was easily repelled. As quick as we had taken Tolosa, the faster it was lost again. Socrates, on the other hand, didn't want to accept the offensive was a failure and thus continued his push north. But what he had forgotten was taking his settlement didn't actually connect him to the northern invasion, meaning he now was completely surrounded in hostile territory. Over in Greece, the pressure from the Macedonians was ramping up, with Antigonus Gonatas now encamping within our border, as well as having other armies march into Dacia. We had to save our ally, so Glaucus left half of his Greek forces in the hands of Lycus, the former commander of the same army Glaucus now leads. This force was intended to defend our own Thracian holdings, while Glaucus himself marched for Odysseus to recruit local units for the expedition into Dacia. However, this decision proved to be fatal, as Glaucus immediately seceded, with most of central Iberia following in his footsteps. This allowed the Macedonians to besiege Philippopolis. Our plan to assist the Dacians was instantly shelved in favor of returning to lift the siege. Zenobius, who was eagerly waiting for the Romans to enter Mauritania, was now forced to leave Africa in favor of liberating central Iberia. These lands weren't all that necessary anymore. The lands neither provided any meaningful income, nor were they needed to sustain our supply lines anymore. But what they did impact was the safety of our trade ships sailing from Greece to the Britannic Isles and the Germanic shores. Furthermore, these colonies served as a beacon of this new colonial age. This conflict had to be solved, and fast. Hence, the Athenian Archon attacked the defending forces at Heraklion. This fog was nerve-wracking, making the elephants uneasy. Our Numidian scouts eventually discovered parts of the treacherous army performing hit-and-run maneuvers to lure them out into the open field. Zenobius placed his army on this high ground position just to realize he had been deceived. A second force was rapidly approaching from the bottom of the hill to the left. This shifted an otherwise simple squashing tactic into one forced into splitting its army up. One minor regiment would hold the ridge, while the rest, along with the elephants, charged down the hill. The elephants proved to be crucial in this engagement, aiding to break one army completely. Over on the ridge, we encircled the more elite forces with our slingers firing into the rear of the hostiles. This caused a reaction, with parts of the enemy force splitting off to chase them, but our cavalry simply hammered into them, breaking the back of this secessionist army. Over time, Zenobia would re-establish democracy to central Iberia again. Same could be said for Thrace, where Glaucus barely made it back in time to lift the siege, and immediately afterwards served justice upon the traitors who betrayed our own country in favor of the Macedonians. This act of justice sparked a bit of hope in the Athenian armies that were suffering from this large-scale conflict. However, it was immediately extinguished by the Britannia, who seemingly had had enough of our presence in their peninsula, starting yet another conflict. To make matters worse, 3 Macedonian armies were approaching Diospolis. Although it was able to withstand a siege once in the past, it would surely crumble under this pressure. Thus, despite the forces from Britannia mobilizing to reach the south and reinforce, Isocrates fully upgraded his units with the finest equipment in the world to then march out towards this river crossing in the hopes of luring the Greeks away from Diospolis all alone. However, as a result of this impulsive action, Isocrates now found himself surrounded by 4 armies. Our agents tried to hinder one army to slightly balance the odds, but failed. Initially, the Macedonians actually refused to cross the bridge, but whether they expected a trap or something was beyond my knowledge. However, this allowed us to focus all our forces on the single army approaching from the same side of the river that we were on. This was a bloody battle where the weather just made it so much worse. Our own flexible army was quite handy in this situation, as this first engagement developed into multiple minor struggles. But that was all part of the Macedonian tactic to defeat us. With our army split up into multiple engagements, their massive host crossed the river, almost catching our scout that kept an eye on them. We couldn't wrap up the fighting in time, leaving us with only our Gallic javelin men and Isocrates himself to fend off the over 4,000 strong force. It was a slaughter, and as Isocrates fell, the remaining army routed. Our invasion of Gallia from the south was completely wiped out, with Diospolis now getting besieged. To our fortune, the Macedonians only used a minor force to surround the city, meaning we just sallied out to chase them away. With that, we immediately reinstated the Stratos 1 army and began mustering new forces. And although we were in position to attack from the north, we now chose to stand down for a bit longer, as we didn't want to send in a 3rd army to its demise. Reinforcements from Britannia were on their way after all. It felt like the only proper commander Athens had left was Glaucus, and his half-Greek, half-Thracian army prepared an ambush to lure the Macedonian ruler into a battle. However, as we arrived at the intended battle site, scaling the massive hillside to organize the ambush, we found the Macedonian forces already there and in formation. Glaucus immediately reorganized his troops, preparing them for combat, sending all the Thracians to the right flank, hoping to shock them in a single charge. As Antigonus Chronotas ordered the Macedonians to attack, our archers engaged, killing dozens, while our Greek front line slowly marched forward. As planned, the right flank inevitably crushed the opposition, paving the road for success. This was a sweet victory, easing the tension on Greece, even though we couldn't chase down Antigonus, leaving him at large. Nevertheless, Glaucus now marched for Dacia, while a second force was raised at Athens. Up here, he largely managed to intercept Macedonian army marching for our allies, but suffered heavy casualties in the process, meaning he also had to fall back again. Over in Iberia, the Britannia were on the move, conquering the Gallici, our trade partner. But this opened up a new opportunity for us, because if you look back at this war so far, there has been a clear pattern. With a good commander, our armies were mediocre at best. But at sea, on the other hand, our navies were supreme. So while we may not be able to completely wipe out their settlements further inland, we could possibly seize control of their coastal ports, of which there were plenty, to then strangle their economy, easing the workload for our ground forces a bit. If we were to win this war, the Mediterranean had to be ours. So we called for Cleisthenes to return south, just like the second fleet at the Black Sea. Our new plan started in Iberia, where the fleet that originally was supposed to reach Caralis now changed course towards the Editani capital, as their armies apparently were on the other side of the peninsula. Taking the port was quite easy. We just had to slice through whatever inferior fleet they had sailing around their shores. Honestly, their ships had more in common with fishing boats rather than proper warships, meaning they were easily swept aside to then assault the port itself. This conquest also allowed our army defending the copper mines to muster new units. Cleisthenes, on his voyage south, also attacked a couple ports along the way, albeit it resulted in more casualties than expected, but nowhere near as many as we suffered at the Battle of Tarraco. Here we engaged this magnificent city with our usual suppressing tactic, to then land our marines so they could do the rest. However, for some unexpected reason, our largest ships didn't reach the shore so our men could disembark, but instead turned around, forsaking our entire campaign strategy in favor of a life as pirates in the Mediterranean. They would never be heard from again. This left our assault with just 3 marine units and our skirmishers. Thankfully, due to our ballistic ships, we overcame this unexpected betrayal, albeit being with heavy losses. Despite our many casualties, this was a massive victory for us. As a result, we increased in Imperium, allowing us to field way more armies and fleets. They did have this massive army marching for our copper mines, but we just hired a couple of mercenaries to even the odds. Dare I say, the tides are turning.